Goedendag, het is een heel groot plezier voor mij hier te zijn in Brussel, Vlaanderen, België. Ik denk dat... het duurt nog een beetje. Ik denk dat autonomie heel belangrijk is voor de steden in België, maar ook voor Wallonië en natuurlijk ook voor Vlaanderen. En ik geloof ook dat jullie uit Zwitserland veel kunnen leren. Het is zeker een inspiratie en ik hoop ook nog een beetje meer als een inspiratie. Gaat verder. Ik denk dat het echt een voorbeeld kan zijn. En jammer genoeg is mijn Frans nog beter als mijn Nederlands. Daarom praat ik op Engels nu. Of op Duits, dat gaat natuurlijk ook. Maar ik denk het zal toch goed zijn en jullie kunnen later ook de vragen natuurlijk op Nederlands stellen en dan zal ik misschien op Nederlands ook antwoorden. The question today is how decentralization improves efficiency and protects future generations. And true federalism really works. There are more than enough studies showing that this is really the case. What's true federalism? True federalism for me is decentralization and real local autonomy plus budgetary autonomy. Okay? And it should be a true bottom-up procedure. Why does true federalism work? Yeah, because through expenditure as well as revenue decentralization, local autonomy, you have better incentives not only for politicians but for citizens themselves to be informed and to try to achieve efficient policies. And that's what we observe in Switzerland, in the cantons as well as in the municipalities there. So the incentives for good politics increase. And I try to be a bit theoretical at the beginning and then I show you the concrete examples from Switzerland and I show you that this can also be generalized to other countries. And I also think it can be generalized to Belgium, to Flanders. The first important mechanism regarding decentralization is exit and voice. And exit and voice induce competition. What do I mean by exit? What do I mean by voice? If you have numerous smaller municipalities, different cantons, different regions, then of course people have the possibility, if they don't like to live in one region, to go to another one or to go to another municipality. Okay? So this puts some pressure, of course, on the municipalities to achieve relatively efficient outcomes. But at the same time, it also increases the need of citizens to be informed about local and regional politics, because you need to know what does the other municipality offer. And all this induces competition. And competition is something good, because we make comparisons, and by these comparisons we copy, or at least we are inspired, as Peter was saying, we are inspired by different solutions. But let's face reality, nobody really likes competition too much. Especially if you are then a mayor of a community or a parliamentarian of your region, and then you are faced with all this competition. Everybody's saying you, oh, our neighbors do better. Switzerland is doing better than Germany. That's putting some pressure, thank God, also on Germany, you know. So what do you want to do? Well, you want to try to escape competition. How can you escape competition? By being innovative, by being a laboratory for ideas. And that's also what federalism does. It's a laboratory for ideas. Precisely, you can copy ideas that others have tried, that have worked, but you also learn something. If others do not succeed as well, then you don't make the same errors once again. So, laboratory of ideas, that's important. And finally, and I'll speak about that immediately, institutional congruence is important. This is also partly what Peter was saying just before. What's institutional congruence? If you think of three circles of people, say decision makers, contributors, the taxpayers, and beneficiaries of public goods, then you have these three groups of people, and sometimes these groups of people are the same, okay? Sometimes not. If they are not the same, we call it institutional incongruence. If the three groups are the same, we call it constitutional congruence. Now think about it. When you are a decision maker and you have to pay for the public goods out of your own pocket, then you also want to benefit. Whereas when you are a decision maker, but you don't have to pay for the things, somebody else is paying, but you benefit from it nevertheless, well, you know, you may think perhaps we can spend a bit more. And it's very evident. Whenever I come to Belgium, and I sometimes come to Belgium, and I travel by train, for example, via Lüttich, Leuc, Liège, I'm impressed by the train station. It's really huge, okay? It's Trump huge, it's huge, huge. And of course, here the contributors are partly at least another group than the decision makers, and definitely another group than the beneficiaries. So what would you do? That's very natural, that's nothing bad. Yeah, you would have relatively high public expenditure, and you would also exaggerate your needs. You need such a large train station. You need such a large community hall, etc., especially if somebody else is paying. This is not something that you really observe in Switzerland because, oh, the communities, the municipalities, the cantons have to pay quite a large part of their public infrastructure, etc., themselves, and then you start thinking, do we really need it or not? So this is a problem if you have institutional incongruence, but it's also a problem if you have the decision makers and contributors are not the beneficiaries. What happens then? Well, what happens then is that you have too little public expenditure, of course, and you neglect certain needs. So both situations are a problem. Of course, the ideal solution that the three groups completely overlap, or that the three groups are identical, that's almost never possible, because there will always be certain spillovers, etc. But at least the aim is to go into the direction that the three groups overlap, and with decentralization you can achieve that slightly better than through centralized means. Okay. Central in a centralized state, but also in a decentralized one, is to make comparisons. And I want to make one comparison at the very beginning. I don't want to compare immediately Swiss cantons and Swiss solutions among each other, but I want to look first at countries. We can learn from other countries too, of course. And I think I make a fair comparison. But some people may say it's not 100% fair. I just list 4 countries: Switzerland, Germany, France, and Belgium. Okay? I took Belgium by chance, of course. And I list them first by some economic indicators, such as gross domestic product, which would be national income per capita. Okay? When you look then at Switzerland and you compare it to Germany and the other two, you see, oh, Switzerland is roughly 20 to 25% richer, and these are so-called purchasing power parity comparisons. When you have been to Switzerland, you know it's really expensive too, okay? It's far more expensive than Germany, of course. But even controlling for that, Switzerland is 20–25% richer. Salaries are twice the amount. So the nominal comparison would give Switzerland an advantage over Germany of 100%, okay? But of course, house prices are more expensive, etc., etc. So life is a bit more expensive. But then again, the Swiss can afford luxury vacations everywhere in the world, okay? Because international money is international money. Look at another indicator. Look at the budget balance. Switzerland has known for quite a long time a balanced budget, often a small positive amount at the federal level or at the aggregated level, which is quite difficult to achieve actually. If you looked at debt levels, then you would realize that Swiss public debts are around 40 to 45% of GDP total debt, including municipal, cantonal, as well as federal debts. So amazingly low, even after the financial crisis. Look at unemployment. I mean, Germany is doing good now, partly due to luck, but Switzerland has known an unemployment rate of around 3% for quite a long time. Okay? So very successful there. Maybe you are not so interested in these economic measures. Maybe you want some competitiveness measures. So what the World Economic Forum is establishing. There, Switzerland is often on rank 1 and always better than Germany and France, and also than Belgium. Now, this is also economic. Let's think about real people, but we still need numbers. Let's take some perceptual measures at least. So I list here perceived health, whether people perceive that their health is good or very good. And I take the most important thing in life. Everybody wants to be happy, all of us, so I take life satisfaction. Social scientists are interested in life satisfaction. We try to measure it. It's completely subjective, as it has to be. What do you observe? Oh, Switzerland happier than all the other three. Actually, Switzerland is systematically competing with Denmark, whether either Denmark or Switzerland is the happiest country. Usually Denmark wins. But Denmark is also highly decentralized, by the way, so perhaps decentralization is linked to happiness. So regarding these comparisons, oh, perhaps there is something special about Switzerland. Now, what makes Switzerland different? What is it that makes Switzerland special? And I think there are two main elements which are really special for Switzerland, which can partly be copied and which could serve as an example. And the two are the following. Both are related to institutional differences. The first one is decentralization, extremely strong and effective decentralization. Decentralization bringing political decisions closer to the bottom, and at the same time increasing institutional congruence because, well, taxpayers, as you will immediately see, taxpayers, decision makers and beneficiaries are also local, regional. Look at it, tax decentralization in Switzerland, approximately 25% of taxes are collected by local jurisdictions. So there are income taxes that are collected by local jurisdictions. You pay part of your income tax to your local jurisdictions, part of your income tax to the canton, which would be the region, and part of your income tax then at the federal level. 25% remain locally. The cantons take 40%, the rest is for the confederation. So clearly expenditures that are made at local level are also to a large degree financed through local taxes, and of course then you start thinking whether you want to expend so much or whether you have different ideas. You also observe an extremely strict no bailout rule. I will give you an example. Swiss local jurisdictions as well as cantons can become bankrupt. This is an entirely new idea to the European Union, of course, that something like that can happen. There is even an example, I will mention that very soon, of the community of Leukerbad, and we can learn something from bankrupt communities too. By the way, there are 2,300 local jurisdictions in Switzerland, all having their own income taxes. And the constitutional setting is that federalism or subsidiarity or decentralization is really enshrined. I took the French article of the Constitution. The cantons are sovereigns unless their rights, unless the Confederation has taken the rights through the Constitution. And the Constitution is decided by the people in referenda. The principle of subsidiarity is very strong, so all actions that can be taken by either local communities, local municipalities, or the cantons are also mostly taken by the cantons. Of course, there is collaboration also at the national, at the federal level. So the discussion that is partly led in Belgium, whether federalism or confederalism is the right concept, that's perhaps a partly technical law discussion. In Switzerland, it's clear that federalism means true decentralization, means true taxation powers for cantons as well as local municipalities, and it means also that you decide on your own expenditures. That's the first thing, that's highly important, decentralization. And the second thing, which complements partly decentralization, is then voice, the voice mechanism, voice through direct democratic participation. Too, I will not talk a lot today about direct democratic participation, but you have fiscal referenda, debt breaks, etc. in Switzerland, which also help to keep the finances extremely well. Yep. Come on. Doesn't like me. Ah, yeah. All this induces strong institutional congruence, of course, bringing together the three groups of circles. Now you might think about Switzerland also a bit differently. And if you look at the details, there is enormous heterogeneity in Switzerland. There is enormous regional diversity, not only regarding language, French and German speaking. Actually, there are Italian speakers, okay? Quite a lot. Plus, there is a fourth language, Romansh, which is spoken in one canton only, which is an old language, roughly 30,000 people speaking it. All this works. The Romansh is even printed on the Swiss francs. So if you have Swiss francs with you by chance, then you will see that it's also written in Romansh. But it's not only language which is dividing, if you want, the country. Dividing and at the same time uniting it, actually. It's religion. Protestant, Catholics, Calvinists, etc. It's topography. So we were speaking about the mountains before. Yes, there are mountains, there are lakes, etc., etc. Topography is highly important, etc., etc. Industrial structure is different among the cantons, which means, of course, that you need flexible solutions, especially in a globalizing world. The more globalized the world becomes, the more important it is for regions, for cantons, to act and to act quickly without waiting for a central solution and to adapt according to their special advantages, to their relative advantages. So the more internationalized we become, the more it is important to act flexibly. You can think of the discussion here. For Flanders, Brexit is far more problematic than probably for Wallonia. So Flanders needs to act itself. So you need regional solutions, especially in the globalizing world, and you need flexibility. I just make a few examples here very quickly. You have heterogeneity in Switzerland regarding industrial structure. You have some cantons here where over 20–30% even are still manufacturing. That's where the watches are made. Okay. Then you have, of course, Zurich here and Geneva, where services, banks are a bit more important, but not only banks, chemical industry, etc. And of course, the chemical industry doesn't go too well along with the mechanical clockmaking. Okay. So solutions need to be different. And then in the center, you have some cantons where agriculture is still important, and that's fine too. And then tourism, etc. So even the service sector is not everywhere the same. You can see it here. Some people think, oh, Switzerland is only banks. That's not true. The banks play a certain role, but they are marginally important regarding employment, for example. Okay? So yes, Geneva also lives partly from the banks, but not only. And of course, we know very well, even in Switzerland, the banks pose a systematic risk. UBS, thank God, didn't go bankrupt like Fortis, but the risk was very high during the financial crisis. So banks are not ideally the best business model that you may have. Iceland tried to make its business model with banks. That didn't work too well for Iceland, at least. So better focus on clockmaking, on watchmaking, etc. On chemical industry, that's what people really need. Okay? But of course, banks play a certain role. Okay? Let's go on. Where do I have to hit it? You have heterogeneity regarding policy preferences. I just took one example, and one example is from a recent referendum regarding buying aeroplanes, buying fighter jets for the Confederation. The fighter jets were not bought, not only because the French-speaking regions in the West were against buying fighter planes, but also Basel, for example, was against buying fighter planes, whereas in the center of Switzerland, relatively conservative cantons, they want to defend themselves, okay, against the bad Germans potentially coming once. I don't know if you need fighter jets in the mountains. That's where you have the Pilatus and the nice mountains in Lucerne, and also, well, also partly here. But you see heterogeneity, and heterogeneity which is large. So 75%, even more than 75% in these cantons, Obwalden, Nidwalden, were pro-fighter jets, whereas in Jura, below 25% were pro-fighter jets. Okay, so extremely large heterogeneity, also regarding policy preferences. And I could have given you other examples. The cleavage does not only run according to language border, but it's rural, urban, it's mountainous regions, non-mountainous regions, etc., etc. So there is large heterogeneity there. And you can see this large heterogeneity on the next slide. Switzerland is an attractive place to live. Yeah, Switzerland is an attractive place to live. I jump over the slide. The share of foreigners in Switzerland is over 20%. In some cantons, it's below 10%. In others, it's above 25%. All over, the share of foreigners is approximately 20 to 25%. So it's an attractive place to live. Do you hear many problems with foreigners in Switzerland? Not so many. Sometimes you hear something if you are in Switzerland, but of course there are not the same problems as numerous other countries have with foreigners. Partly because the foreigners are selected, of course, partly also because they are very well integrated locally, very well in comparison to other countries. Now you could look at taxation and outcomes of the Swiss cantons. And the larger the heterogeneity is, the more important decentralization becomes. And this is very well known in economics for a very long time. The more heterogeneity you have, the more likely it is that if local governments, if regional governments make the supply of public goods, that this supply is also very efficient, because preferences again will be different, and because we can learn from each other what are good solutions. Now you could say, but given these large differences, and given tax decentralization, giving decentralization of spending power, etc., will there not be differences in outcomes? Okay, this is what we are a bit afraid, that there will be large inequality at the end. Okay, so are there differences in outcomes in Switzerland between the cantons or between local jurisdictions? And the answer is yes, of course. Okay, there are huge differences between the cantons, relevant differences between the cantons. Okay. So some cantons are extremely attractive, Zug for example, that's the extremely low tax canton. Others are a bit less attractive, okay? So there are differences, and if Belgium would introduce this system or would be inspired by that system, there would be differences. Perhaps Wallonia some regions in Wallonia would catch up very quickly, okay? And would be better than regions in Flanders, okay? But the important thing to realize is that the differences in Switzerland between cantons are still relatively small. And what do I mean by relatively small? I make two examples immediately. I mean that when you compare it to the differences that you have in centralized countries, then the differences are small, and the the levels are either amazingly high in general, regarding income levels, for example. Incomes are high everywhere in Switzerland, okay? Incomes even in the poorer cantons, such as the Italian-speaking canton of Ticino. Their incomes are they're lower than in Zurich, okay? Approximately only 2/3 of what you can earn in Zurich, you will earn in Ticino. But the Ticino is twice richer than the neighboring region in Italy, okay? And of course the differences in Italy are far higher than they are in Switzerland. So let's look at two other numbers. First, let's look at taxes. Here is a map for Switzerland. I said taxation of income is done locally, okay? You have here taxation of single persons with a gross income of 80,000 Swiss francs. 80,000 Swiss francs is roughly 72,000 euros. That's not a that's an okay income in Switzerland, but not too large, okay? And you see that, for example, in Zurich, you pay approximately 10% income taxes. That's quite attractive. In Geneva, you pay a bit more, okay? But also 17%, okay? This seems quite okay. I mean, this is, you can say, oh, this is a large difference, okay? 7 percentage points, but yes, you know how much income taxes you pay in Belgium. Federal income taxes will be added to that, of course, okay? So it increases a little bit, but nevertheless, income taxes are relatively low. And you can specialize then as a canton, okay? So it's not so attractive to have a moderate income in Geneva because you will pay relatively high taxes. It's more attractive to be a married couple with 150,000 Swiss francs. So these, again, are not, salaries are very high in Switzerland. These are not amazingly high incomes. They are fair incomes. And you see, oh, taxation for couples, for married couples, is quite attractive. So it seems that Geneva wants to attract also families, okay? Take business taxation, there you have also large differences, of course. But it's not necessarily Geneva which is offering extremely attractive business taxation. Geneva actually has the highest business taxes in Switzerland, 31%, okay? Lucerne is extremely attractive there. But Geneva can even afford to levy such high taxes on business because Geneva is attractive for numerous reasons, with its international institutions, with its border with France. It's far more attractive than any region in France, okay? So even there you can levy relatively high taxes on business, which makes Geneva rich and which will make Geneva a net contributor to fiscal equalization, what I will speak about immediately. But even Zurich has relatively high taxes for businesses, partly also because people want to tax these businesses themselves in order to decrease their own taxation, which is fair, okay? If you think that this is a good solution, other cantons have different strategies. Lucerne offers very low business taxes, a bit higher individual taxes. Oh, different solutions which are relatively apt for the heterogeneity, for the different preferences, etc. Take here, this is, I think, an amazing map. It shows the small differences in outcomes with impressive outcome levels. You see here unemployment rates in Switzerland, okay? And the unemployment rates in the yellow cantons are below 1.5%, okay? And then here there are some cantons where you have the differences, where it's over 6% unemployment. These are problematic cantons. 6% unemployment is high, is considered to be very high. But of course, so there are differences in outcomes, yes. For example, my most beloved canton, Appenzell-Innerrhoden here, okay? They have below 1% unemployment. I checked it recently, and I think it's 80 people that are currently unemployed. These 80 people are really problematic, you know. It's difficult to find jobs for them. Still, so there are differences, yes. So the unemployment rate in Geneva is 5 times that of Obwalden here, okay? But think of Germany only. In Bavaria, you have numerous regions with roughly 4% unemployment. And then you have in Berlin unemployment of over 20%. So that's 5 times, but 5 times at the high level. Here it's also 5 times, but at the low level, okay? So this is the advantage also of federalism. You still have differences, of course, but everything goes in the right direction. Efficiency increases. Not only efficiency, why does efficiency increase? Partly. It's not only that people move from one jurisdiction to the next one, but people are really interested in local politics and cantonal politics. And I took an example from the best German-speaking newspaper in Switzerland, so they call it a national newspaper, okay? And people are interested in the local public finances of the community of Thalwil, that's a municipality, I use the words interchangeably, the municipality in Zurich. Why are they interested? Yeah, they are interested because they want to compare their municipality with other municipalities, and then they are even interested in knowing what's the net wealth per capita according to the communal finances in Thalwil, and the net wealth of Thalwil is positive. It's 3,000 francs, 2,800 francs. So that's lower than public expenditure. That's lower than public investment. Okay, so relatively attractive place for us. Not the most attractive place in Switzerland, not the most attractive place in Zurich, because other communities, other municipalities are doing far better. And of course, you need to put pressure on Thalwil now that it's copying the good solutions too. And people are interested in that. People will know, at least roughly, that the high-tax cantons as well as the attractive municipalities where taxes are relatively low and where expenditure is relatively high, or where public goods are relatively good. Of course, there is some fiscal equalization too, okay? And the interesting thing in Switzerland with fiscal equalization is at least twofold. The first is that people themselves, the Swiss themselves, wanted fiscal equalization. In 2004, a clear majority of 64% voted in favor of fiscal equalization in a referendum. So people want to redistribute a little bit, okay? Not too much, but it's clear, well, there are differences. We want to adjust some of these differences. Sometimes there are problems, so we need some additional money. So let's show some solidarity, okay? 64% pro, almost all cantons apart from the canton of Zug, which is the highest net contributor, so it's clear. If you know already in advance that you will be only paying, then you may be a bit more skeptical of that, okay? But in general, you know that sometimes you may be a loser, and then it's good to have some equalization. The aim of the fiscal equalization was to provide a certain limited equalization of fiscal capabilities, so it's not of the taxes that local jurisdictions and cantons collect, but it's the collection capabilities and a true extension at the same time of fiscal autonomy. And that's interesting. And I think that could serve also as an example for Belgium, okay? Fiscal equalization, yes, may be needed, may be accepted, but at the same time, you want more fiscal autonomy. Okay. What are the mechanisms? How does it work? Also, this is interesting, where people can learn something perhaps. It's a resource-based equalization mainly of roughly 4 billion Swiss francs. So 4 billion Swiss francs is 3.5 billion euros, a bit more than 3.5 billion euros. Resource-based meaning you take the income-generating potential of individuals as well as businesses, and you calculate what could potentially be taxed, okay? And then you make an average of that for every canton, and if a region is below 85% of the average, then it will receive a certain amount of fiscal equalization. So the fiscal equalization system already accepts that there will be differences also in the end, okay? So we don't bring everybody to the same level, but we bring everybody to a relatively fair level, okay? Then there is, of course, a burden-based equalization system. Mountainous regions get a bit more equalization, cities also get a bit more. And then, and that's also interesting, there is a hardship compensation. Whenever you change a system, there will be some losers. Okay, and it's in order to convince the losers to go along with the changes of the system, you may want to give some hardship compensation. In this case, it's the losers of the earlier fiscal equalization prior to 2004. They are compensated additionally for the next 25 years, but with a sum which decreases 5% every year. Okay, so we carry on the old system still a little bit. Okay, but it decreases every year, and of course that's considered fair. That's why you get relatively clear majorities who support such a system. You can see it here. Who is paying? Well, it's Geneva that is paying. It's Zurich that is paying. So the yellow, the orange. Cantons are contributing cantons, the others are receiving. But you see, even the relatively poor canton of Ticino, they are quite close to become net payers, which is interesting because they have theoretically, they have quite some revenue generating potential, which they don't use that effectively. That's perhaps partly due to language differences. They are not competing as much with the other cantons as within the language, as they are competing within a language region. Okay. Up. Come on. Now, exit voice is important, institutional congruence is important. But even more importantly for me, or according to my view, in the long run, is this idea that federalism acts as a laboratory and that good solutions are copied and that there is inspiration by comparison. Take one example here. Almost all Swiss cantons have introduced debt breaks. Okay? And they have introduced the debt breaks because one canton, the canton of St. Gallen, had a debt break since the 19th century. It changed its debt breaks in 1960, and then cantons with certain fiscal problems, they got inspired by the canton of St. Gallen, and they introduced a debt break too. Here you see the canton of Fribourg, French and German-speaking canton, that introduced the debt break in 2006, and suddenly you see that the budget proposal is always almost balanced. Okay? So that worked very well. They simply copied the solution of St. Gallen. But St. Gallen was even more inspiring, actually, not only for other cantons, but the Swiss federal debt break introduced in 2004 was also inspired by the cantonal debt break of the small canton of St. Gallen. It's a German-speaking canton very close to Austria. Okay? And now the funny thing is, then the Swiss federal debt break was introduced in 2004. Do you know who inspired the different debt breaks in Europe and in Germany? Well, it was the Swiss debt break, of course, because researchers from Germany and also partly from France were analyzing the Swiss debt break, and they said, oh, there are interesting elements which we can use in Germany. It's not working so well in Germany, of course, but at least it served as an inspiration too. So the small canton of St. Gallen, who had a debt break for over 100 years, served as an inspiration for the other cantons, for the Federation, and now for Europe. Who would have thought that the small canton is really the reason why we have these debt breaks now? Another point, we can really learn from communities even if they make errors. Here you see an error-prone community. in Switzerland. That's the community, the municipality of Leukerbad. It's a very nice municipality in the in Wallis. Okay, so you can go there, enjoy the mountains, etc. But this community had really large problems in 1998 because, well, they had their own ideas, they wanted to invest a lot. They invested over 300 million Swiss francs, so roughly, say, 300 million euros, okay? And they accumulated debt also of 300 million euros. The problem was, the community has only roughly 2,000 inhabitants, okay? So that's a bit too much, okay? Even if you have a lot of tourism, that's a bit too much. So it went bankrupt. And the creditors, the good Swiss banks, okay, they are not so good really, because they wanted, of course, the money back, and they wanted the canton to pay, to bail in, okay? But then the federal court decided, no, that's not possible. It's forbidden. There is a strict bailout rule in Switzerland regarding communal as well as cantonal finances, and cantons as well as local jurisdictions are autonomous, so parts of the debts have to be paid back by the local jurisdiction, and the rest, well, creditors can see what they want to do with it, okay? And indeed that worked, but immediately it was a shock at the beginning. Now there are differences in interest rates between the cantons and also between communities, all at a very low level. Interest rates are low, but of course people know that local municipalities can go bankrupt, and people themselves, politicians as well as citizens, know that they have to take care of public finances, which served also again as an inspiration for additional debt breaks and fiscal referenda at the cantonal as well as municipal level. So you learn even from the negative example. Now you can say, oh, that's a really bad thing, a community going bankrupt, okay? But it's one of 2,300 local jurisdictions, okay? Think of the number of countries we have in the world and count the number of countries that went bankrupt since 1998, and you will end up with more than just Greece. Argentina, Russia, etc., okay? So one negative case, but we can even learn from this negative case, and life is still good there, a bit worse than somewhere else, okay? And actually it's a riddle. It's a riddle, because if you look at municipal debts in Switzerland, I've just shown you the example before of Thalwil. They had a net wealth of 3,000 francs per capita, okay? So not even debts, but net wealth, okay? The question is, why is this the case? Because you would think if you have so large autonomy and if people are mobile, then you should accumulate a lot of debts, okay? And especially if you think that, oh, debts are a burden for future generations, then it would be fun to incur debts now because somebody else is paying it. Now then you have theoretical arguments by economists saying, well, debts are no burden for the future generation if certain assumptions are fulfilled, if people are 100% altruistic, if they have children and they really save for their children for the debts that the parents, that they occur themselves, okay? But this is simply not realistic, especially not in a federal country like Switzerland. Many people don't have children, and if people are very mobile, you would think that there is an incentive to go for large debts. But this is not what we observe. However, if this is the case, okay, we are back to the common wisdom that debts should be a problem for future generations. The moralist view is then, oh, debts are really something bad. That's what moralists everywhere say, okay? Homo economicus, or also politicians should say, oh, debts are cool. In fact, debts are the coolest thing of the world because, somebody else is paying, I am the beneficiary, and I am deciding, so that's a cool situation. The question then is, why do Swiss local jurisdictions have comparatively low public debts? And the cantons too. And the reason is that we owe these debts to ourselves. due to debt capitalization. In local jurisdictions, if you have federalism, if you decide yourself, it's not so attractive to become indebted. And I make the example with the community, the municipality of Leukerbad. So, come on. So this is the theoretical example, but we really observe it in reality. Take it like that. You have the community of Leuk, which is just next to the community of Leukerbad, okay? Here. There is a border, both are independent, both are autonomous, both make their own decisions, okay? Suppose that the houses are identical. You observe these beautiful Swiss houses, okay, with the mountains, so that's partly where you want to live, okay? Now what we know is that public debts are far higher in Leukerbad than in Leuk. Where would you want to live? Well, you would want to live, of course, if everything else is the same, you would want to live in Leuk and not in Leukerbad. So property prices should be higher in Leuk than in Leukerbad. What does this mean? Well, if we incur high public debts, then we owe it to ourselves because we make ourselves less attractive as a municipality, as a canton, okay? So we incur the debts and it makes us less attractive unless we invest it very wisely. And this is one reason why numerous property owners in Switzerland are highly interested in good communal and in good cantonal public finances, because they know that they have to be attractive in order to attract people to live there, because they owe it to themselves. Otherwise, property prices will decrease. We've explored that in numerous studies for Switzerland. You really observe that in communities, municipalities where property prices are, where public debts are low, property prices are high, whereas where public debts are high, property prices are low. This also holds when you make complicated calculations. It's just there. It even means that if public debts increase by 1 Swiss franc, on average property prices go down by between 0.6 and 1 Swiss franc. So debts are not a struggle in Switzerland, and this holds for any country actually with true federalism. Are not a struggle between generations anymore, but it's a struggle between today's property owners and tenants. And this means that true federalism with real autonomy of local jurisdictions acts as a protector of future generations, because we owe the debts that we make now to ourselves, and then we start thinking twice. And I think these insights generalize, that will be almost the end of my presentation. They generalize, for example, in Denmark. We observed the very same situation in Denmark regarding when public debts in local communities increase, so in local jurisdictions increase, then property prices go down. There was a very interesting situation a few years ago in the community of Farum in Denmark, which is not as independent as Swiss local jurisdictions, okay, but still they make numerous decisions themselves, okay? And there they had, unfortunately, a mayor who was spending too much too. That came out. It was a rather bad story, but that can happen. It happened in Greece, okay? Property prices went down. Then the people realized, the central government will bail in, property prices increased again, okay? Then it doesn't work so well anymore if you realize somebody else is paying. Then you tend to go for debts. But in general, the mechanism works. The mechanism works, federalism, or say, decentralization works in Scandinavia. In general, Switzerland is not the only country which is heavily decentralized. It's not the only country which is competing in a certain way. If you look at Scandinavia, all Scandinavian countries are successful, and they are also successful because they copy their solutions from each other, and they are in strong competition with each other, and they are inspired by each other, okay? It's not working potentially so well as in Switzerland, but relatively well better than most other European countries. And most people say, oh, there are 3 Scandinavian countries, but you could actually count 5 of them, okay? And then you even observe that, that only one of them is in the Eurozone. And it's fine for them too, okay? Go even further, look at history. The cradle of our civilization is where we nowadays have most of the problems. But when Greece, ancient Greece, was decentralized with city-states, that was when it was the most successful phase, and when we, even nowadays, get most of our inspiration from. Now you can say, well, the city-states were uniting against external threats, okay, fighting against the Persians. Then you can say, oh, they were also fighting against each other, yeah. Brutal wars, of course, very bloody. But if you compare, even that, if you compare the bloody wars in ancient Greece, decentralized ancient Greece, with the bloody wars that central regimes fought, then the wars were not that bloody, and the pure fact that we know so much about these wars shows how highly developed that was. Conclusions. I really think that federalism with true regional and local autonomy works. Not only in Switzerland, but wherever similar solutions are applied, it really works. It fosters institutional congruence, it leads to competition, and it induces comparisons. So in federalist systems, jurisdictions also generate new ideas. That's the laboratory. You want to experiment, okay? Wallonia could soon realize that certain solutions that Flanders has are good, and vice versa, okay? And innovation is central, especially in today's world. And finally, federalism actually acts as a protector for future generations, and these insights generalize. I'd like to thank you very much. Dank u wel. Het was een echte plezier en ik ben daarna voor vragen hier natuurlijk.